In Charleston's elite circles, the Beckett name has always been synonymous with prestige and an unshakable legal legacy. In the refined society of Charleston, their reputation opened doors to historic mansions, charity galas, and private clubs where influence flowed as freely as champagne. But behind the polished smiles, glittering soirees, and centuries-old estates lay a story of quiet endurance, bottomless greed, and a carefully engineered plan for retaliation. Everything came to a head on a humid night in June 2025 at a $4.8 million beachfront mansion on Sullivan's Island. Bonnie Beckett, a 4-year-old strategic consultant, had just moved into the home she had spent 12 relentless years saving for, every bonus tucked away, every indulgence postponed, every exhausting project endured with a single goal in mind: ownership. At 11:42 p.m. As waves rolled gently against the shore outside her balcony, promising what should have been her first peaceful night in years, her phone rang. The caller was Victoria Hale, her stepmother. There was no greeting, no congratulations, no acknowledgement of Bonnie's achievement. "We're moving in tomorrow," Victoria announced flatly. "Your father says it's fine." Bonnie hadn't even had time to process the words before the final blow landed. "If you don't like it, you can find somewhere else to live." To an outsider, this might have sounded like a typical clash between a stepmother and stepdaughter, an uncomfortable but ordinary family dispute. But Bonnie didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, a slow, cold smile formed on her lips. Because to understand that smile, you have to go back to when she was 17. When Bonnie was 17, her world collapsed. Her mother died of ovarian cancer just 5 months after being diagnosed. The speed of it all was brutal. One moment there was hope, treatment plans, whispered reassurances. The next, there was a funeral and a silence that swallowed the house whole. Her mother hadn't just been her parent. She had been Bonnie's anchor, her emotional refuge, the one person who truly saw her. After she was gone, the once warm family home turned unbearably cold. The quiet felt heavy, suffocating. Every room echoed with absence. Her father, Gerald Beckett, a respected attorney, buried himself in work to escape his grief. Courtrooms and case files became his shield. But in doing so, he left his daughter alone during the most painful months of her life. Bonnie learned quickly that grief could be a solitary experience even inside your own home. 2 years later, he remarried. Victoria Hale entered their lives polished and composed, graceful, articulate, impeccably dressed. At first, she was kindness personified. She spoke gently, she offered help, she smiled often. For a brief moment, Bonnie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this woman could help rebuild something that had been broken. But the sweetness didn't last. Within months, the cracks began to show. Victoria didn't storm in with open hostility. She was far too strategic for that. Instead, she began tightening her control slowly, methodically rearranging routines, redefining traditions, reshaping the household dynamic. And with each subtle shift, Bonnie found herself pushed further to the margins. The lemon cakes her mother used to bake every Sunday disappeared. In their place came a carefully curated coldness, polite, calculated, distant. Then came the first undeniable blow. Victoria claimed Bonnie's childhood bedroom, the room filled with memories, photographs, and the last lingering traces of her mother, and converted it into a walk-in closet for her own daughter, Paige. Bonnie stood there, stunned, watching movers carry out pieces of her past as if they were nothing more than outdated furniture. Her father didn't protest. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He simply patted her shoulder and said, "It's just a room, kiddo." But it wasn't just a room. It was the last place in that house where Bonnie still felt like she belonged. Bonnie's father, consumed by his legal career and blinded by his trust in his new wife, never truly saw what was happening. To him, the tension in the house was minor typical growing pains of a blended family. He dismissed conflicts as small misunderstandings, never realizing that each small thing was slowly carving deep wounds into his daughter's sense of belonging. By minimizing the problem, he unintentionally enabled it. Over the next 15 years, Bonnie became invisible. She was quietly edged out of family photographs, Holiday cards featured smiling portraits of Gerald, Victoria, and Paige while Bonnie was away at school or busy with work. She paid her own way through college with scholarships and by juggling two part-time jobs, surviving on little sleep and relentless discipline. Meanwhile, Paige's tuition at an elite private school in Savannah was fully funded by Gerald without hesitation. Whenever questions arose, Victoria delivered her signature line with polished calm. "I'm not being cruel, I'm just being practical." Practical. That word became the justification for every imbalance, every exclusion, every subtle humiliation. But invisibility, Bonnie eventually realized, had one powerful advantage: privacy. While her family assumed she was just working with spreadsheets, Bonnie was quietly building something far greater. She entered the world of strategic consulting and climbed with precision learning, corporate warfare, negotiation, psychology, financial architecture, and long-term leverage. She mastered rooms where influence shifted markets. She studied people the way others studied textbooks. By 2025, she had risen to the level of senior strategic advisor, earning over $340,000 a year. Her investments were calculated, diversified, disciplined. What no one in her family knew was that her net worth had grown to $5.2 million. After years of relentless work and disciplined saving, Bonnie finally reached the biggest dream of her life: owning a beachfront home, one tied to the unfinished dreams and cherished memories of her late mother. For 12 years, she lived below her means. She invested carefully, passed on luxuries, worked through exhaustion, and constantly sharpened her expertise. Every promotion, every bonus, every calculated risk had a purpose. To Bonnie, the house was not just a $4.8 million property on Sullivan's Island. It was freedom. It was independence. It was a promise kept. The day she signed the contract, her hands were steady but her heart was not. When the final signature dried, she felt something shift inside her. Not triumph, not pride. Relief. That first evening in the mansion, she sat alone on the balcony overlooking the Atlantic. The rhythm of the waves was steady, almost protective. For the first time in years, there was no competition to win, no boardroom politics to navigate, no silent battles at family gatherings, just peace. It was the first time since she was 17 that Bonnie truly felt she belonged somewhere. But peace, in her life, had always been temporary. Just before midnight, her phone rang. Victoria. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of what Bonnie had achieved on her own. Instead, the same cool, commanding tone Bonnie had grown up with. "We'll be moving in tomorrow," Victoria said matter-of-factly. "Your father agrees." Before Bonnie could respond, Victoria continued, already planning. She spoke as if the house were hers. She assigned bedrooms. She discussed rearranging furniture. She casually mentioned that Bonnie could take the smallest room since you don't need much space anyway. Then came the familiar undercurrent of authority, the assumption that compliance was automatic. It was as if Bonnie were still 17, as if nothing had changed, as if 12 years of sacrifice, strategy, and success meant nothing. Victoria wasn't asking. She was claiming, but what Victoria failed to understand was this. The invisible girl who once stood silently in the hallway had grown into a woman who understood contracts, leverage, power structures, and consequences. And this house? This house was not a childhood bedroom someone could casually take away. This time, Bonnie wasn't losing anything. This time, she was ready. That phone call left Bonnie stunned. She didn't cry or argue. She simply stood there, quietly listening to every harsh word. Her hand trembled, her heart pounded, but deep inside, a cold determination began to take shape. When Bonnie called her father to confirm, the truth shocked her even more. He had absolutely no idea about any such plan. It was nothing but a blatant lie fabricated by Victoria. In that moment, Bonnie realized this was no longer an ordinary family conflict. This was a deliberate invasion, the opening move in an outright attempt to seize what wasn't hers. Her 15 years of patience and endurance had only made Victoria bolder. And that very night, as she stood silently before the vast ocean, Bonnie understood she could no longer remain quiet. This house was the result of a lifetime of effort, a living memory of her mother, and the final boundary she would protect at any cost. After the fateful midnight phone call, Bonnie could hardly sleep. The scattered details from years past suddenly began to fall into place, forming a terrifying picture. The way Victoria manipulated the family, controlled the finances, and constantly tried to isolate her. None of it felt random anymore. Bonnie had a strong feeling that behind it all was a carefully calculated scheme. And for the first time in her life, she decided not to run from the truth, but to face it head on. The next morning, Bonnie went to a reputable law firm and asked them to review all documents related to her father's assets and finances. Within just a few days, the preliminary findings sent chills down her spine. Her attorney uncovered something suspicious in Gerald's property records: a transfer of ownership for the house in Mount Pleasant bearing a signature that didn't look quite right. At the time, Bonnie wasn't ready to fight. She quietly put the document away. But when Victoria and Paige casually took over her beachfront villa, throwing her clothes into the hallway and forcing her into the smallest room, the one meant for storage, Bonnie knew her patience had run out. Victoria even began hosting lavish dinner parties for her elite friends, introducing the house as something she had arranged so Gerald would have a place to relax, turning Bonnie into nothing more than an unemployed woman living off her savings in everyone else's eyes. The horrifying truth slowly surfaced through the investigation, led by Marcus Trent and forensic specialist Patricia Sloan. Victoria hadn't just forged Gerald's signature to transfer the $1.2 million house into her own LLC, Hale Premier Properties. She had also quietly withdrawn $380,000 from his retirement account, opened credit cards in his name, and racked up $47,000 in personal expenses, and siphoned $215,000 from their joint account into a private trust. In total, more than $1.84 million had been misappropriated. Even more disturbing, Bonnie discovered a letter her late mother had written to her 17 years earlier, hidden away in a locked drawer by Victoria. It was her mother's final message: "You have always been enough. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Victoria hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen a mother's last words to her child. Bonnie quietly began working with a handwriting expert, gathering airtight legal evidence. At the same time, she discreetly arranged to freeze her father's accounts, preventing Victoria from withdrawing any more funds. Every move was deliberate and calculated, careful, methodical, and leaving no room for error. Inside Bonnie, the pain of a betrayed daughter slowly transformed into clarity and strength. She was no longer the timid girl who endured everything in silence. Now, she was the one holding the full truth in her hands, waiting for the right moment to expose it all. Bonnie didn't choose a kitchen confrontation or a quiet lawsuit. She chose the night of the 14th of June, 2025, the annual gala of the Low Country Bar Association, where Victoria was scheduled to be honored as Philanthropist of the Year. With the support of editor Della Fairchild and a mountain of undeniable evidence, Bonnie prepared a welcome gift Victoria would never forget. At the Belmont Charleston Place Hotel, in front of 220 guests, judges, attorneys, and members of the elite, Judge Raymond Holt unexpectedly announced that the award presentation would be paused due to allegations of financial misconduct. Bonnie stepped onto the stage, not as the overlooked daughter, but as someone ready to present cold, hard facts. Side-by-side images of forged signatures and bank statements showing money flowing into Victoria's private accounts filled the large screen. The entire ballroom fell silent when Gerald stepped forward and stated firmly, "I did not sign that document. I didn't even know that company existed." The final blow came from Helen Briggs, the ex-wife of one of Victoria's former husbands in Savannah. She appeared to testify that this was a repeated pattern. Victoria consistently targeted successful but trusting men and systematically drained their assets. Victoria Hale, dressed in an expensive champagne-colored evening gown, was forced to leave the ballroom to the sharp echo of her heels against the marble floor under the cold, silent rejection of Charleston's entire social elite. What followed that night was nothing short of an earthquake. Victoria was indicted on 4 felony charges, including forgery, exploitation of a vulnerable elderly adult, identity fraud, and embezzlement of charitable funds. An additional $85,000 from the Hale Beckett Foundation uncovered later. She was ordered to wear a GPS ankle monitor and now faced a potential prison sentence of 5 to 15 years. Gerald filed for divorce soon after and began therapy to understand how he had allowed his wife to drive a wedge between him and his daughter for 15 years. Bonnie, too, began opening her heart to her stepsister Paige after receiving a sincere letter of apology, one in which Paige admitted she had chosen comfort over compassion for many years. Bonnie did not return to her former company. Instead, she founded her own strategic consulting firm, Beckett Advisory Group, reclaiming honor for the Beckett name. Now, each morning on Sullivan's Island, Bonnie sits on her porch, rereading her mother's letter while gazing out at the ocean. She understands that she no longer needs anyone's permission to live her life. She no longer shrinks herself to make others feel taller. The truth has set her free, and the sea now brings her peace instead of worry. After all the tension and bitter confrontations, everything gradually entered a new chapter once the truth was fully revealed. She no longer carried anger or resentment in her heart, but instead felt a deep sense of relief, as if an enormous weight had finally been lifted. The unreasonable demands, the emotional pressure, and the quiet contempt from her family no longer had the power to control her life. She realized that standing up for herself was not merely an act of defiance, but the first step toward freedom and true maturity. During this time, she began reflecting on the path she had traveled. Once someone who constantly tried to please others, willing to sacrifice her own desires just to keep the peace, she gradually learned how to listen to herself. The painful experiences became valuable lessons, helping her understand the importance of self-respect and personal boundaries. She realized that love does not mean endurance, and family is not an excuse for selfishness or manipulation. She started dedicating more time to herself, caring for her mental well-being and rebuilding her life on her own terms. The beachfront house, once a symbol of conflict, slowly became a place of peace. Mornings filled with the sound of waves, and quiet afternoons, watching the sunset, allowed her to rediscover the beauty of simple happiness. She began inviting the friends who truly cared about her to share that space, creating warm and genuine memories together. At the same time, her relationship with her family began to shift. While things could never return to the way they were, honesty at least helped everyone understand one another's boundaries. She no longer felt the need to explain or justify her decisions. Instead, she carried herself with calm confidence, respectful, yet firm in order to protect the life she had worked so hard to build. In the end, she understood that true value does not lie in wealth or in the recognition of others, but in the ability to live authentically. By daring to stand up, to say no, and to choose her own path, she rediscovered genuine freedom. From that moment on, each day became a new opportunity to live more fully, peacefully, and happily. After regaining balance in her life, she began building a new direction for herself, one that was more positive and grounded. Old wounds no longer throbbed like painful scars. Instead, they became motivation to move forward. She realized that if she remained trapped in the past, she would never open the door to new opportunities. So she chose to let go, not to forget, but to live more lightly and take ownership of her present. She poured her energy into her work, investing time and dedication into growing her career. Her steady efforts gradually produced clear results. What once began as a simple desire to support herself and be independent turned into significant progress, proving her true capabilities. Each successful project, each milestone achieved, strengthened her confidence. She came to believe wholeheartedly that she could stand firmly on her own, without relying on anyone else. It was this independence that finally gave her the sense of security and freedom she had longed for. Alongside her career, she also made a conscious effort to nurture a richer inner life. She learned to savor the small things: a quiet morning with a cup of coffee, a good book, long walks along the shoreline. Those seemingly simple moments became deeply healing, reminding her that happiness doesn't have to come from grand achievements. By slowing down and truly being